Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe they didn't see her as one of them. Maybe that was the point. The morning sun burned low across the naval base, painting the asphalt in gold and shadow. A black sedan rolled to a stop beside the training facility. From it stepped a woman no one noticed. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, hair pulled tight in a regulation bun. No decorations, no swagger, just another face in the crowd, or so they thought. She closed the door, the echo swallowed by the distant thrum of helicopters. The driver gave a small nod, no words, and drove away. She stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what was about to begin. Months of preparation, months of pretending to be someone ordinary. The base was alive with motion. Men jogging between hangars, instructors barking commands, the metallic rhythm of discipline everywhere. She walked toward the training wing, her boots striking the concrete with even, deliberate rhythm. No one saluted, no one paused. Good. She wanted it that way. Inside, the corridors smelled faintly of oil, coffee, and sea air. On the wall, framed photos of decorated SEAL teams watched her pass, faces of men who had survived the kind of missions that rewrote a person's soul. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the quiet reminder of what she was here to do. She wasn't here to learn from them, she was here to lead them. The briefing room hummed with conversation. 12 SEALs, elite, experienced, and utterly certain of who they were. They'd been told a new training coordinator was coming in, not a commander, not yet. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez checked his watch, leaning back in his chair. Late on day one, great start. Chief Petty Officer Jake Williams snorted, arms folded, old scars tracing pale maps across his skin. Command probably sent some desk jockey. Happens every rotation. Politics beats experience. The others laughed quietly, that knowing, soldiers' laughter, half cynical, half defensive. Men who'd learned to measure every new superior before trusting them. The door clicked. Silence spread through the room like a slow fuse. Sarah stepped in. No introduction, no apology for being late. She walked straight to the front, placed a single duffel beside the podium, and met their eyes, each one of them. Good morning. Her voice was clear, unshaken. I'm Lieutenant Chen. I'll be coordinating your training for the next few weeks. Rodriguez tilted his head, smirk forming. Training coordinator. Thought we were meeting our new commanding officer. Sarah didn't blink. Commander Harrison will join later. For now, you'll be working with me. The lie rolled smoothly off her tongue, part of the cover. There was no Commander Harrison. She was the one in charge, but to earn their respect, she couldn't start with the truth. Williams raised a hand. With respect, ma'am, what's your background? Most of our coordinators have run the program themselves. Sarah nodded slightly. I've been through specialized training relevant to your upcoming operations. My job isn't to teach you how to be SEALs. You already know that. My job is to make you better. Vague, purposefully so. It worked. They didn't trust her, but they were listening now. She turned to the whiteboard, began writing a sequence of numbers and coordinates. Your first exercise begins in 30 minutes. Reconnaissance in Zone Charlie. Intelligence suggests an enemy weapons cache there. A few glances passed between the men. Routine, too routine. Sarah added, there's a twist. The enemy been tracking your previous patterns. Everything that used to work won't. That got their attention. Rodriguez leaned forward. What kind of intel do we have? Limited, satellite imagery from yesterday, but nothing current. Comms restricted to emergency only. You'll need to adapt. Packets landed on the table, crisp and numbered. She watched who grabbed them first, who waited, who whispered before acting. Observation. Her first test wasn't the mission, it was them. Within minutes, maps unfolded, pens scratched notes, and quiet debates filled the air. Sarah stood still, letting the rhythm of the room reveal its patterns. She noted leadership instincts, impatience, the unspoken hierarchy that lived beneath every team's surface. They were good, but predictable. When Martinez, the youngest, asked confidently, "Ma'am, we've trained there for years. We know every inch," Sarah stepped closer. "When was your last exercise?" "3 weeks ago." "And what makes you think nothing's changed since then?" The silence that followed wasn't confrontational, it was reflective. She'd unsettled them, nudged the first crack in their certainty. Williams finally stood. Alpha and Bravo teams, standard recon formation. North Ridge approach, establish overwatch, will move when ready. Sarah gave a single nod. Remember patterns kill. 28 minutes later, the teams disappeared into the hills beyond the base. Sarah followed at a distance, a lone figure cutting across the terrain with quiet precision. She carried only binoculars, a radio, and instincts honed through years of work no one in that briefing room could imagine. From the ridge, she watched their formation flow like clockwork, efficient, disciplined, invisible. Perfect. Too perfect. They reached the observation point. Williams raised his hand. The line froze. Moments later, radio static crackled. Alpha leader to control, negative visual on primary target, building empty. Bravo team confirms no sign of weapons cache, all clear. Sarah smiled faintly. They'd fallen right into her trap. The cache hadn't vanished. It was simply somewhere they couldn't see, moved deliberately to expose their blind reliance on habit. They regrouped, whispers over the radio betraying confusion. "Ma'am," Williams said finally, "intel's off. Structures are empty." "Are they?" The question hung. She didn't explain. She wanted them to look harder, think differently. Minutes later, simulated gunfire cracked through the trees. Martinez had walked straight into an ambush that wasn't supposed to exist. Man down, taking heavy fire from unknown positions. The radio erupted. Voices collided. Half the team scrambled for extraction protocols, half pressed forward to complete objectives. Sarah stayed silent, recording every move in her mental ledger. Who hesitated, who acted, who broke formation. Williams did what she expected, split forces, half covering the wounded, half advancing. Rational, predictable, dangerous. An hour of chaos unfolded. They adapted slowly, but every familiar strategy betrayed them. Enemies anticipated flanks, countered textbook maneuvers, and used the terrain better than they did. Finally, Sarah called it. Exercise terminated. All teams returned to base. The forest quieted. Distant echoes of frustration carried through the air. They failed. And that failure was exactly what she needed. Back in the briefing room, the silence felt heavier than before. Sweat, dust, bruised pride. Rodriguez broke first. That intel was garbage. Either it was wrong or someone wanted us to fail. Sarah folded her arms. "You're right, the intel was wrong, deliberately." Murmurs erupted. Williams frowned. "With respect, ma'am, training's supposed to make us better, not set us up." Were the scenarios impossible or just unexpected? Her calmness disarmed them. They looked at each other, replaying the exercise in their minds. Some admitted quietly that they'd stuck to old habits. Others blamed luck. Sarah let them argue, then said softly, "In 3 weeks, you'll deploy on a mission where your enemy knows your playbook better than you do. Every tactic, every signal, every pattern. They'll anticipate it. The question is, can you change before they strike?" The room went still. She could see the shift, the understanding that this wasn't just about drills. This was rehearsal for survival. Martinez, still nursing the sting of early elimination, crossed his arms. "So what do you suggest? Throw out everything that makes us SEALs." "Not throw out, evolve, build on it, adapt." She turned to the board again. "Tomorrow, urban infiltration. No heavy gear, no night vision. You'll move like civilians, think like civilians, work like ghosts." They exchanged uneasy glances. This was far from standard protocol. Williams raised a hand. "Ma'am, when do we meet Commander Harrison? Some of these changes seem above your clearance." Sarah met his gaze evenly. "Commander Harrison has complete confidence in this program. You'll meet him when the time's right." Another lie, another test. That night, long after the room emptied, Sarah stayed behind. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. She traced the training map with her finger, replaying every misstep, every hesitation she'd seen that day. 12 elite SEALs, and yet they still fought ghosts from their own training. They learned precision, control, power, but not unpredictability, and unpredictability was what would save them. She unlocked a secure device, typed a coded message. Phase 1 complete. Team performance aligned with projection. Recommend escalation. Seconds later, a reply appeared. Proceed. Maintain cover. Identity revelation not authorized yet. Sarah exhaled slowly. She hated lying to them, hated the looks of skepticism, the quiet dismissal in their eyes. But respect earned through truth was fragile. Respect earned through results endured. Outside, the ocean wind pressed against the glass. She looked out into the darkness, the faint shimmer of moonlight on the water. Leadership wasn't about being liked. It was about being ready to be hated until you proved why you shouldn't be. Tomorrow she would push them harder, strip away the gear they trusted, force them to think with instinct, not technology. They didn't know it yet, but every discomfort she created was a piece of their survival. For now, she stood alone in that empty room, the faint hum of machines the only witness to her thoughts. A woman pretending to be a coordinator. A commander in disguise. A secret waiting for the right moment to surface. She whispered to herself, barely audible, a promise, not a prayer. "They think I'm just another recruit. Let them." Because when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't need words. It would speak through action. And in the world she lived in, action was everything. She stood alone in the dawn haze, watching the horizon burn orange over the sea. No music, no noise, just the sound of flags snapping in the wind and the distant echo of boots on asphalt. Another day to prove herself without saying who she really was. "Why is she doing this to us?" One voice muttered behind the wall of the training bay. First the fake intel, now she's talking about urban infiltration without gear. Sarah heard them. Of course she did. She'd been trained to hear everything: whispers, hesitation, resentment. Those small sounds told more truth than any report ever could. She tied her hair back, adjusted her plain fatigues, and stepped inside. 12 men turned toward her, the tension thick enough to taste. "Morning," she said simply. "Hope you got some rest." No one answered. She could feel their frustration. Yesterday had bruised their pride, elite SEALs beaten by a coordinator with a marker and a whiteboard. Good, that frustration was fuel. She pointed to the tactical display behind her. A satellite photo of an abandoned coastal town, crumbling walls, narrow alleys, broken rooftops. Today's objective: infiltration and extraction, target building here. She tapped the center of the map. Hostile elements throughout. You'll be split into 2 teams. Half of you will operate with full tactical gear. The other half, she paused, meeting Rodriguez's eyes, nothing beyond basic civilian tools. Williams frowned. "Ma'am, that's not a balanced scenario." "It's not supposed to be." She let the sentence hang. The stillness in the room felt like the moment before a storm. Rodriguez leaned back, arms crossed. "What are we proving here? That we can fail again?" Sarah looked at him, her voice calm. "No, that you can adapt before failure matters." A low murmur moved through the room. Pride flared, doubt followed. "Gear assignment will be random," she continued. "If you get the short end, make it work. That's how the real world plays." 30 minutes later, they stood at the Mock City compound. a skeletal maze of half-collapsed concrete, shipping containers, and shattered glass. Rodriguez got the full loadout: tactical vest, rifle, comms, breaching tools. Martinez, luckless, was handed nothing but a sidearm and a utility knife. "Fantastic," Martinez muttered, checking the empty pouches on his vest. "Think of it as character building," Sarah said from the observation platform, her radio clipped to her shoulder. They didn't like her tone, too steady, too confident. She could feel their irritation radiate through the dust-choked air. "Exercise begins in 10, she called out. "No live rounds, no unnecessary noise. Move like civilians, think like ghosts." Rodriguez looked at Williams. "You believe this?" "Orders are orders," the chief replied, tightening his gloves. "Let's move." When the horn sounded, silence swallowed the compound. Team Alpha, Williams, Chen, Morrison, and 2 others, advanced through the northern alleys. Team Bravo, Rodriguez, Martinez, and the rest slipped in from the west. Sarah followed their feeds on multiple screens, hands clasped behind her back, eyes flicking between channels. "Alpha, report status." "Moving, no contact yet." "Bravo." "Advancing, civilian conditions simulated, no visibility on hostiles." She smiled faintly. They were falling into rhythm, efficient, methodical, too methodical. Then the first mistake came. Martinez reached a locked door leading into a warehouse. He stared at it for 3 seconds, expecting the usual toolset to do the work. Then he remembered he had none. "Ma'am, permission to improvise." "Always," Sarah answered. He crouched, pulled 2 paper clips from a discarded file on the floor, twisted them with the knife blade. Within 30 seconds, the door clicked open. "Nicely done," Sarah murmured under her breath. Across the compound, Rodriguez's team struggled to coordinate without their encrypted comms. He was used to relying on hand signals, clean, silent. But the tight alleys broke their line of sight, forcing them to rely on instinct instead. "Move slow," he whispered to his team. "Listen for the air." For the first time, he began to think like she wanted, not like a soldier following a map, but like a hunter feeling for vibrations in the dark. By noon, the operation had devolved into chaos, exactly as Sarah had designed. The teams lost contact, routes collapsed, opposing forces, role players from base security, cut them off from planned exfil points. Rodriguez found himself behind a rusted dumpster, pinned by simulated fire. "Ma'am, we're boxed in. No options." Sarah leaned toward the mic. "There's always an option, you just haven't seen it yet." He gritted his teeth, glancing at the locked back door beside him. He had no breaching charge, no lock pick, just raw ingenuity. He ripped a metal strip from the dumpster's hinge, bent it into shape, and jammed it into the latch. A spark, a twist, the door gave way. They moved through, silent, efficient, unseen. Sarah smiled, progress. Meanwhile, in the control room, a junior tech watched her silently. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." "Go ahead." "They're starting to catch on. You're not just running drills, you're testing them." Sarah didn't look away from the monitor. "I'm preparing them." "For what?" "For something they don't believe can happen yet." The tech hesitated. "You think they'll be ready?" Sarah finally turned to face him, her eyes steady, unreadable. "They'll have to be." By afternoon, the teams were learning to improvise. A broken mirror became a periscope. A cable spool became a rope. A plastic tarp became camouflage. Each improvisation came with a little more pride, the kind that doesn't come from medals but from rediscovering something basic, problem-solving without technology. At one point, Rodriguez's voice came through, half laughing. "Ma'am, I think we're building an entire toolkit out of garbage." Sarah replied, "Good. Someday that garbage might save your life." A pause, then unexpectedly his voice softened. "Copy that." It was the first time he'd spoken to her without sarcasm. Late in the day, the simulation escalated. Sarah activated hidden variables, shifting enemy patrols, blocked exits, compromised objectives. They had to improvise new plans mid-mission. Morrison, the youngest, muttered over the radio, "This is insane. Real missions don't fall apart this fast." Williams cut in, "Kid, real missions fall apart faster." That shut him up. Sarah watched Williams closely. There was something about the old chief, a quiet patience under the gruffness. He didn't talk much, but when he did, the team listened. He was beginning to understand her purpose, even if he didn't know the full truth. When Bravo finally reached the target building, they found the entrance barricaded. "No way through," Rodriguez reported. Sarah keyed her mic, "Then make one." They did, using nothing but leverage, an improvised pry bar and coordinated pressure. The barricade broke. Objective secure, extraction successful. The horn sounded, exercise complete. The debrief that night was different from the day before. No shouting, no frustration, just the heavy quiet of people thinking. Sarah stood at the front of the room. "Talk to me, what did you learn?" Rodriguez scratched his head. "That I rely on my tools more than my brain." "Go on." "When you don't have the fancy stuff, you start paying attention to hinges, to shadows, to air. You stop assuming you're the smartest thing in the room." Martinez nodded. "When you can't blow through a door, you notice the unlocked window next to it." A few chuckles, small, genuine. Sarah allowed herself a faint smile. "Good, that's the point. Your equipment is a tool, not a crutch. The moment you depend on it, you give your enemy the power to take it away." Williams leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "These drills, they're not in any SEAL manual I've seen. Where'd you learn them?" Sarah hesitated. She'd rehearsed this question a dozen times. Various sources, some from specialized units, some from real-world operations that never made it to print. Morrison frowned. "Have you been in combat before, ma'am?" Sarah met his gaze evenly. "I've been close enough to know what happens when you stop adapting." Her answer was yes or no, just a quiet truth wrapped in ambiguity. Enough to satisfy some, not all. After the debrief, most of the team left tired but thoughtful. Only Williams lingered. He approached her slowly. "Ma'am, I don't know what your game is, but the men are changing, in a good way." "That's the idea," she said. He studied her, eyes narrowing. "Still, I've been doing this 15 years. You don't talk like a trainer, you talk like someone who's led people into fire." Sarah smiled faintly. "Maybe I just study leadership well." He didn't press, but she knew he didn't believe her. When he left, she sank into the empty chair at the end of the table. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to breathe. Leadership wasn't about shouting orders. It was about listening to silence, the silence that told her when a man was beginning to trust her, or when he was still waiting for her to fail. She opened her secure device, typed a brief message. "Team adapting faster than expected. Recommend timeline acceleration." A pause, then the reply blinked on screen. "Maintain cover for 48 more hours. Identity reveal unauthorized. Enemy movement accelerating." She stared at the message. 48 hours, 2 days left to keep pretending. Outside, night wrapped the base in cold air and salt wind. From her quarters, she could see the faint glow of the ocean under moonlight. The same ocean she'd crossed once, years ago, during the training that nearly killed her. Back then, no one believed she'd make it past week 2. Too small, too quiet, too restrained. They didn't know that silence was her weapon. She remembered the cold water closing over her head, the instructor's voice yelling above the surf. "You don't belong here." And she remembered what she'd whispered back through chattering teeth. "Then I'll earn it." That was the night she stopped needing permission to exist. The next morning the men arrived early. No one complained, no sarcasm. Something had shifted overnight. Not full respect yet, but curiosity. They wanted to see what she'd throw at them next. Sarah stepped onto the training ground, clipboard in hand. Today we combine everything. Mixed gear operation, urban infiltration, dynamic rescue under pressure. Rodriguez grinned. So basically hell. She returned the smile, pretty much. They laughed, a sound that felt different this time, lighter. Williams whispered under his breath, "She's getting to them." Maybe. Or maybe she was just reminding them who they were, soldiers who once thrived on the unknown before predictability dulled their instincts. Sarah watched them prepare, checking weapons, stretching shoulders, teasing each other in low voices. Ordinary men who'd seen extraordinary things and carried the invisible weight of them. As they geared up, she caught her reflection in a window, plain uniform, no rank insignia visible. Somewhere between truth and disguise. She whispered, not for anyone to hear. 2 more days. 2 more days before they'd know who she really was. 2 more days before the mission that would test everything. He didn't mean to say it aloud, but the words slipped out anyway. Something's off about her. Rodriguez's voice was low, more curiosity than accusation. Williams looked up from cleaning his rifle. Off how? She's too calm, doesn't act like a trainer, acts like someone who's been shot at and didn't flinch. Williams smirked faintly. Maybe she has. Rodriguez shrugged. Then why lie about it? Across the hangar, Sarah was running through checklists with the logistics officer, methodical, detached, focused. Every movement precise, like she was measuring time instead of spending it. The men thought she was preparing another impossible exercise. They were right. The morning brief began with a single line on the board. Hostage extraction / urban complex / time limit 180 minutes. No maps, no satellite overlays, no neat diagrams, just the bare parameters. Sarah turned to face them. Today you're rescuing a captured asset held in a multi-story structure. You'll operate in mixed-gear teams. Some of you have full equipment, others have minimal. Communication between teams will be limited. You'll have to coordinate without the luxury of perfect intel. Morrison raised a hand. Are we expecting civilian presence, ma'am? Yes, treat everyone as potentially hostile until verified. Non-combatants complicate the scenario. That's deliberate. Rodriguez frowned. Deliberate how? Sarah's eyes met his. Because confusion is what kills teams first, not bullets, confusion. The room quieted. She passed out mission packets sealed in plain envelopes. Study them, but don't rely on them. Conditions will change once you're in the field. Williams flipped open his folder, scanning the sparse information. No blueprints. Sarah shook her head. You'll build your own once you're inside. That was when they realized this wasn't about tactics anymore. It was about mindset. The training compound had been transformed overnight. Shipping containers stacked into narrow corridors, concrete slabs forming half-rooms, shattered glass scattered underfoot to betray sound. Smoke machines hissed in hidden corners, breathing out artificial fog that caught the morning light like ghost breath. Sarah watched the men assemble at the entry gate. Each one looked ready for war, nerves disguised as confidence. Rodriguez checked his comm. Bravo team ready. Williams echoed, Alpha standing by. Sarah lifted the radio. Copy that, you're green. The gates clanged open. Within minutes, the air filled with movement, boots on steel, breath against respirators, quiet hand signals flashing through dust. Inside the labyrinth, Rodriguez led Bravo through a collapsed stairwell. 2 of his men carried full kits, 2 carried almost nothing. Lights out, he whispered. Martinez slipped forward, sidearm drawn, door locked. Rodriguez nodded, ideas. Martinez grinned, remembering yesterday's lesson. He stripped the wire from a broken lamp, looped it into the lock, twisted until the latch gave. After you. They moved like smoke, until the first crack of simulated gunfire shattered the stillness. Contact left, Morrison shouted. Bravo ducked into cover. Foam rounds pinged against walls, someone cursed. Suppress and move, Rodriguez ordered, but their high-tech optics failed in the smoke. The men with minimal gear suddenly had the advantage. They'd been learning to rely on instinct and sound. Morrison motioned toward a side passage. We can flank through there. Rodriguez hesitated, then nodded. Do it. They slipped through, low and fast. The firefight thinned, replaced by the hiss of smoke and the muffled pulse of heartbeats. From the observation deck, Sarah tracked their progress on multiple feeds. Her expression stayed calm, but her pulse quickened with every near miss. A voice beside her, one of the tech operators, spoke quietly. They're adapting faster than expected. That's the point, she replied. Still, the operator said, you run them hard, harder than I've seen anyone run SEALs in training. Sarah's eyes stayed on the screens, because they won't have time to learn later. Alpha Team reached the upper levels. Williams led them through a narrow hallway wired with trip sensors. Chen, the younger male operative who shared her surname, whispered, laser grid ahead. We can't pass without triggering it. Williams studied the spacing. Ideas. Chen pulled a small mirror shard from his pocket. We can redirect the beam into itself, create a feedback loop. He adjusted the mirror until the laser reflected back into its source, shorting the circuit. The sensor flickered off. Williams raised a brow. Where'd you learn that? Chen smirked. Been paying attention to the lady downstairs. 2 hours in, both teams converged on the target building from opposite sides. The hostage, an actor simulating a captured analyst, was somewhere inside. Rodriguez's team breached from the west, Williams's from the east. Alpha in, Williams whispered. Bravo moving, came the reply. Sarah's voice cut through the comms. Time check 60 minutes. The teams advanced through dim hallways, painted with shadow and light. Then came the complication. Sarah flipped a switch on her console. Alarms blared. Red strobes lit the corridors. Thick artificial smoke flooded every level. Williams cursed under his breath. Visibility 0. Chen coughed, switching to thermal. No good interference. Sarah leaned toward the mic. Adapt protocols, manual navigation only. It was the test she'd been waiting for. The moment where gear became dead weight and instinct became salvation. Inside the smoke, chaos reigned. Rodriguez called out, Alpha, this is Bravo, audio only. We've lost sight of the objective. Williams answered through static, copy, proceed by sound markers, stay low. Somewhere above them, simulated hostiles moved, shadows within shadows. Martinez whispered, I hear voices, east stairwell. Move, Rodriguez ordered. They found the hostage bound to a chair in the center of a room, a spotlight burning down on her like an interrogation scene. Got her, Martinez breathed. But Sarah's design wasn't finished. The room was rigged with mock explosives. A faint blinking light pulsed beneath the chair. Rodriguez froze. Ma'am, we've got a device, possible booby trap. Sarah's voice remained calm. Copy, proceed with caution, disarm protocol optional. Optional, Morrison hissed. She's insane. Rodriguez swallowed hard, sweat stinging his eyes. We're doing it. Using what they'd learned in earlier drills, they improvised a safe extraction, sliding a metal tray beneath the chair to distribute weight, cutting wires in sequence, moving the hostage free. Timer stopped at 1 second. Sarah exhaled quietly in the control room. They'd done it. When the horn sounded, no one cheered. They were too drained for that. Back in the briefing room, sweat mixed with dust on every face. Sarah entered last, silent as always. She placed her clipboard on the table. Talk to me, she said. What did you see? What did you feel? Williams spoke first. Felt real, too real. Rodriguez nodded. Half the time we didn't know what was happening, but somehow it worked. Sarah studied them. And why did it work? Martinez answered quietly. Because we stopped waiting for orders. She smiled. Exactly. They crossed a line without realizing it, from dependence to autonomy, from training to thinking. Then Williams leaned forward. Ma'am, these scenarios, they're not random. They feel like you're preparing us for something specific. Sarah hesitated, the words balanced on her tongue. Before she could answer, her secure comm vibrated. A coded alert flashed on the screen. Enemy timeline ACCLERATED, mission deployment 72 hours. Her heart jolted. Rodriguez noticed the flicker of emotion before she masked it. Ma'am, everything okay? She looked up slowly. Gentlemen, there's something I need to tell you. The room fell silent. But first, she continued, I need your word that what you're about to hear doesn't leave this room. They exchanged wary glances. Then Williams said, You have our word. Sarah took a breath that felt heavier than any she'd taken in months. My name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, she began, but I'm not your training coordinator. Confusion rippled across the table. I'm your commanding officer for an upcoming classified operation. The air froze. Rodriguez blinked. You're what? Sarah met his gaze. Your SEAL commander. The silence that followed was thunderous. Martinez exhaled, almost laughing. That's impossible. There are no female SEALs. There are now, she said quietly. I completed selection 18 months ago. Pilot program, classified. Williams leaned back, stunned. Why the deception? Because I needed you to respect capability, not gender, she said. If I'd walked in wearing rank, you would have tested me for the wrong reasons. No one argued. They didn't have to. The truth was written in their faces, the memory of their skepticism, their jokes, their doubt. Rodriguez rubbed his temples. So Commander Harrison doesn't exist, Sarah said. The exercises, the restrictions, the impossible scenarios, they were designed to prepare you for a mission against an enemy who knows every standard SEAL tactic. They've studied us for years. The weight of it settled in. Morrison whispered, You're serious. Sarah nodded. We deploy in 72 hours. Mission details incoming. Until then, you keep training like your lives depend on it, because they will. No one spoke. Finally, Williams said softly, Understood, Commander. The word landed heavy and real. Sarah looked around the room. In their eyes, shock mingled with something else, respect born from recognition. She won them, not with authority but with proof. And as they filed out, one by one, she sat in the empty silence, letting the weight of truth settle. Outside, the sea wind roared against the hangar doors, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she allowed herself a moment of stillness. 3 days. That's all they had before theory became war. They didn't speak for a long time after she told them the truth. The air in the room felt different now, thicker, heavier, as if oxygen itself had turned to glass. 12 of the most battle-tested operators in the Navy sat in silence, staring at the woman they'd mocked, doubted, and underestimated. Finally, Williams broke the quiet. You're telling us you're a SEAL, one of us. Sarah nodded. That's right. He studied her face, searching for some sign of arrogance or apology. There was none, just quiet certainty. How? He asked simply. Same way you did, she said. Hell week, dive phase, land warfare. The difference is I had no one who thought I should finish. She said it softly, without bitterness. Rodriguez leaned back, shaking his head. 18 months ago, they told us integration was still in testing. No active deployments. It was, Sarah said, until a pilot program proved otherwise. I was part of that program. Martinez scoffed, and we didn't hear about it. You weren't supposed to, she replied. Only a handful of command officers even know. Operational security. Williams rubbed his jaw, the tension in his shoulders visible. Then what's our actual mission, Commander? Sarah looked around the room, meeting each of their eyes. 3 days from now, we're deploying against a hostile network that's been studying American special operations for over a decade. They've learned our playbook, every signal, every tactic, every pattern. That's why you've been training the way you have. Because what they know about you could kill you. No one moved. This group calls itself the Shadow Network, she continued. They're led by a former intelligence officer from a hostile nation. He's been recruiting former soldiers, building a private army with one goal, to predict and counter U.S. special operations. She paused, letting it sink in. Our mission is to recover a captured CIA asset, Dr. Jennifer Walsh. She was taken 6 days ago while investigating their weapons routes. She has access to classified intelligence networks. If they break her, we lose operational security across half the region. Rodriguez leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What's the target location? Sarah turned to the screen, pressing a key. The projection changed to a grainy satellite image of a mountain range. Here, she said, remote compound 200 miles from friendly forces, built into a natural cave system. Minimal surface activity but high electronic signatures below ground. That's our objective. The room filled with the faint hum of the projector. Williams frowned. That's a fortress, air support. Limited, Sarah said. The area has anti-air defenses. The caves provide natural cover against bombardment. This will be a ground insertion only. Numbers, Rodriguez asked. 40 to 60 hostiles, former military, well-trained, well-paid, and highly motivated. 60, Morrison whispered. 12 of us against 60. Sarah looked at him. 12 who know how to adapt. She walked closer to the map. They'll expect us to hit them like a hammer. We won't. We'll be smoke, quiet, fluid, unpredictable. They've studied how seals move, so we'll stop moving like seals. A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the room. For the first time since her revelation, some of the men began to nod, not in approval but in understanding. She handed out thicker, heavier packets this time, real intelligence briefs, stamped classified/EYES only. This, she said, isn't an exercise. This is the real thing. Rodriguez flipped open his folder, scanning the photographs. Who took these? Human intel from embedded assets. Some of it's outdated, but it's what we have. Williams studied the layout diagrams. What about escape routes? If stealth fails, we'll need alternatives. 2 potential exfil points, Sarah replied. Primary through the North Ridge tunnels. Secondary through a collapsed ventilation shaft, risky but usable. Both are narrow, steep, and unstable. We won't have time for rehearsals. Martinez frowned. This is a suicide run. Sarah looked at him steadily. No, it's a mission that demands everything we have, but not suicide. She turned back to the team. You've all seen missions go wrong before. This one will test you beyond that. That's why I pushed you so hard, because what you've learned these past days might be the only reason we come home. Silence filled the room again, not of disbelief now, but of men reckoning with reality. Rodriguez closed his folder and sat back. Ma'am, what's your background before the SEALs? Sarah hesitated. The answer was complicated and classified. I worked in intelligence, she said finally. The kind that never makes it into reports. Language, infiltration, unconventional warfare. That's why I was chosen to lead this mission. Chosen by who? Williams asked. Admiral Morrison, she said quietly. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Any relation to the same Morrison who's our fleet commander? Yes, he's the one who approved this operation and this team. Williams exhaled through his nose. So the rumors about black directives, they're true. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. An hour later, when the room emptied, she sat alone again, staring at the mission map. Her reflection hovered over it, tired eyes, stiff shoulders, a face she barely recognized anymore. Leadership had a cost. Every order she gave would put lives on the line, 12 men who'd only just begun to believe in her. She touched the photo of Dr. Walsh pinned to the board, a woman in her 40s, smiling beside a relief truck, unaware that within days she'd be buried in the dark heart of a mountain. "Hold on," Sarah whispered. "We're coming." The next morning the tempo changed. The base turned from classroom to battlefield rehearsal. Shipping containers rearranged into mock tunnels. Smoke filled the air. Training became war. "Alpha, you're on breach and clear. Bravo, flank left. Maintain noise discipline." Sarah's voice cut through the chaos like a metronome. The men moved with precision, but something was different now. They weren't just following her orders, they were syncing with her rhythm. She could feel it, the unspoken shift from skepticism to cohesion. When Williams moved, Rodriguez mirrored. When Chen cracked a door, Martinez covered. Even Morrison, the youngest, stopped overthinking and started trusting instinct. They weren't perfect, but they were becoming dangerous. During a break, Williams approached her, sweat streaking his temples. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we need to talk about what happens if this mission goes bad." Sarah nodded. "Go on." "If we're compromised, we'll be cut off from extraction for hours. No backup, no medevac. What's the fallback?" "Survival and evasion," she said plainly. "You'll carry beacons, but activation is last resort. If we're discovered, our priority becomes evading capture until we reach the fallback ridge." "Understood," he said. Then after a pause, "The men are with you now. Thought you should know." She smiled faintly. "I noticed." "You earned it," he said, voice low. "Not because you're in charge, because you didn't quit." That was the highest compliment a SEAL could give. That night, she gathered the team for final mission preparation. The lights in the room were dim, the only illumination coming from the flickering tactical map. "This is our timeline," she said. "We depart 0500, helicopter insertion from offshore carrier. Low altitude, radar silent. Drop point here, 3 clicks from the compound." Rodriguez studied the contour map. "You sure about that landing zone? It's tight." "I'm sure," she said. "Trees for cover, minimal visibility from thermal scans. From there we move on foot." "Estimated time to contact?" 2 hours. "Rules of engagement?" Williams asked. "Full authorization for lethal force to protect the hostage and ensure mission success. But we stay silent unless forced. The moment we start shooting, extraction becomes harder." The men nodded. Chen pointed at the lower tunnels. "What about explosives? Facilities probably booby-trapped." "Confirmed," Sarah said. "Our intel suggests demolition charges embedded throughout the cave system. We'll have to disable or avoid them." Morrison muttered under his breath. "Feels like a trap." "It probably is," Sarah said. "Dr. Walsh might even be bait, but if she's alive, we can't leave her there." Her voice carried no drama, only quiet conviction. That was what silenced their doubts more than anything else. The way she spoke about duty like it was a promise, not a speech. When the briefing ended, she gave them one last chance. "If anyone has concerns about my leadership, say it now. No judgment, no penalty. Once we deploy, there's no time for hesitation." The room stayed still. Then Rodriguez spoke. "Ma'am, I'll be honest. I didn't think I'd ever take orders from a female commander, but after this week, I'd follow you into hell." Martinez nodded. "Same here." One by one, each man voiced agreement, some with quiet conviction, others with a single word: "I." When it reached Williams, he simply said, "You've got 12 men who'll do whatever it takes." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She hid it behind a nod. Then let's earn it, she said softly. Tomorrow we make it count. Later that night, she stood outside the barracks. The ocean whined cold against her face. She could hear the faint hum of generators, the shuffle of boots, the murmured laughter of men who didn't know if they'd be alive 3 days from now. She closed her eyes. This was the moment before the leap, the edge between theory and reality, between leadership and loss. She'd been here before once years ago in a different desert with a different name. That mission hadn't gone clean. People had died, people she'd loved. This time, she promised herself, would be different. She looked toward the dark horizon, where the sea met the night. Beyond it waited mountains, enemies and choices that would test everything she'd built. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said it. They thought I was just another recruit. She exhaled slowly, eyes hardening. Tomorrow, they'll find out what that really means. They moved like a single animal at dawn, silent, coordinated, heavy with purpose. Every step measured, every breath economical. The world had narrowed to straps, boots, and the low hum of engines. Pre-dawn sky pressed cold against the base as they loaded the helicopter. Gear tight, faces set. No jokes, no last-minute nervy bravado, the kind of brittle humor that used to leak through before missions. Now, everything felt softer at the edges, as if the thin membrane between the life they knew and the one that waited beyond it had been peeled back. Sarah watched them from the ramp, cataloging small things. Martinez fingering a worn photograph tucked inside his helmet. No one else noticed. Rodriguez tapping the same rhythm on the side of his rifle, as if counting down to some personal metronome. Williams standing a fraction taller than usual, jaw clenched, the old scars catching the weak light. She felt the weight of leadership like a stone in her chest, not heavy from rank, heavy from responsibility. 12 lives folded into a plan she had designed and rehearsed until every failure had become a lesson. Still, lessons are paper in a real storm. She gave them a single nod, simple, direct. Helicopter engines wound up like angry beasts. The world around them grew loud. Rotors, the creak of harnesses, the nervous rustle of gear. The carrier's deck fell away. The drop into the black was not cinematic, it was work. Cold wind bit at unshielded faces. Night vision green painted the inside of helmets, silhouettes shifting like ghosts. "Keep breathing," Sarah said quietly over the comms, not because they needed to hear her, because she needed to hear herself say it. They descended low and silent, skimming the sea where radar signatures were minimal. Every man held to his training, the muscle memory that lived in bones. For a moment, looking at them, she felt something like pride, but it was raw and complicated by fear. Pride after all this pretense and testing. Fear because pretense wouldn't be enough if the shadow network had anticipated them as well as intelligence suggested. The landing was tight, trees clawed at rotor wash, ground uneven, the scent of pine and salt. They disembarked in pairs, gloved hands through the night. Footfalls swallowed. No light but the faint glow of instrument panels and the trickle of moon through canopy. "Move, light and silent," Williams breathed. He had no need to issue the order, the men were already ghosts. They progressed toward the drop point in a formation that minimized exposure, 2 lines, one covering, one moving. Sarah kept her eyes low, listening for the small sounds that betrayed human presence, the whisper of clothing, a breath snagging on a throat, the distant scrape of animal life. Her own breathing never slowed. Old pieces of memory threaded through her, training in wet cold, a past insertion where one wrong breath had cost a man everything. She shoved the flash of that past away and focused on now. 3 clicks out, they split. Martinez and Morrison took the narrow gully on the left, small and fast. Rodriguez and Chen moved along a ridge, broad and watchful. Williams and Sarah cut toward a shadowed seam in the rock face where the approach could bypass the main sentry lines. For the first hour, the terrain was an enemy of its own. Loose scree, ancient scrub, and the constant threat of slipping. Their boots whispered on stone. They navigated by hand signals and the tight economy of their radios, burst transmissions only, encryption brief and brutal. Sarah kept a mental map of each man's breathing, the cadence of their steps, who seemed to lag, who strained. Leadership is as much about reading the tiny fractures as it is issuing the big orders. At the perimeter, the compound looked almost mundane beneath a spill of moonlight, stone outcroppings, a few outbuildings, a torn fence. But training taught her never to trust the obvious. The shadow network's footprint was deceptive, camouflaged caches, false sentries, and the sort of human traps designed by thoughtful cruelty. She felt the hair on the back of her neck rise, the animal warning of danger that never lied. "Recon," she whispered into her throat mic. Chen, light on his feet, slid forward with two others. Thermal imagery fed back a scatter of hot signatures below ground, machines, crews, the steady heat of life hunkered in caves. The deep chambers their intelligence had hinted at were active, too active. They moved like breath through corridors carved into rock. The cave's mouth gulped them in, swallowing the night sky. The air changed immediately, cool, damp, with that stale metallic tang of an underground lair. Flashlights were a liability. They used only slivers of light, and only when absolutely necessary. Down the first tunnel, they encountered booby traps, pressure plates masked as debris, tripwires thin as hair. Martinez found one first, his hand steady as he disarmed it with fingers that had done lockpicking in better moods during rehearsals. He looked up at her with a small, private grin, something like a child who had solved a puzzle, and she allowed herself a brief, unsteady smile in return. If a man could smile in hell, it was a good sign he'd keep his head. They threaded deeper. In the low glow of a rear-view camera, she saw rooms stacked with metal crates that smelled of oil and old blood. Monitors blinked silently, mapped to circuits whose purpose they could only guess at. A shadow moved, a patrol. Rodriguez signaled left. They melted into alcoves like smoke. Hearts beat loud in quiet ears. Then the first contact. Not a firefight yet, but the squid squeal of alarmed radios clattering across the frequency like broken teeth. Somewhere far above, a searchlight swept the terrain. Rodriguez hissed, 2 sentries, movement east. Sarah's mouth went dry. They had been detected. Not all activity is deliberate. Sometimes connections fray and things unravel. But this was trouble, small and immediate. "Execute contingency," she said. "Diversion now." Rodriguez and Martinez moved like a single shadow, setting a small, non-lethal charge to sound in a clump of rocks. The explosion was a dull punch, a staged thunder that drew guards away from the compound's core. Footfalls thundered. Radios screamed. The tunnel's echo swallowed sound and spit silence in its place. They used that silence to slip through. In the central chamber, they found a room where men sat with maps and mugs, casual and unsuspecting. The sight of uniformed fighters in this place should have been impossible. That casualness was their enemy. The team struck with silent force, takedowns quick, precise. Nothing cinematic, only the small, brutal business of rendering a man ineffective. They found signs they'd expected and others they hadn't. Photographs of movement corridors, lists of names, notes in a language Chen read without hesitation. Papers that suggested not just a local cell, but a web, contacts in distant ports, planned operations weeks out. The shadow network lived in books and encrypted memory cards. Dr. Walsh, they found evidence that she'd been moved at least once. Footprints in fresh dust suggested relocation. The room had been primed to mislead. Then came the worst sound, the faint mechanical counting of timers. Somewhere below, a device ticked a slow, inexorable Morse of doom. Chen's fingers flew, and Martinez's hands hovered over wires like a seamstress with a thread. "Timer," Chen whispered. "Multiple charges placed along primary corridors." Sarah felt the weight of the choice like a physical thing. The job wasn't just a rescue. It was a race against the architecture of destruction someone else had designed deliberately to erase every trace of them. If they tried to disarm everything, the clock would run out. If they moved faster, they might trigger the whole system. "Alternate," she said. "We don't stop to clear. We go low and fast and trust the secondary exits. Keep her alive, get out. Rodriguez's jaw set. She may be bait. She may be. Sarah's voice was a blade. But if she's bait, the cost of waiting is too high. They split, crawling through passages that drank sound. The ceiling sweated in the humid dark, and each step had to be chosen like a promise. Finally, in a low chamber disguised by an old maintenance room, they found a woman curled on a cot, eyes sunken, bandaged wrists, skin a pale map of exhaustion. Dr. Walsh looked up as Martinez's voice said, "Dr. Walsh, we're from the United States." For a breath she did not move. Then recognition slow, as if memory struggled like a lost animal finding scent, and then an intake of air that broke something inside the room. "You came," she whispered, voice raw. "They." "We're getting you out," Sarah said. Everything else unspooled around that truth: gear, escorts, routes. Dr. Walsh clung to them like a truth, small and human, and the team's energy changed. Rescuing a room full of intelligence was one thing, rescuing a person was another. It made the risk personal. The return was a different kind of storm. The demolition timers they had feared began to sing, first barely, then rising into a chorus that shook dust from the cave's ribs. Explosions punched behind them like fists. Tunnels began to collapse, and the team moved with a terrible grace, lifting, pulling, dragging, improvising as they fled. Chen's electronic skills bought minutes, short-circuited circuits that had been designed to fail only after they'd escaped, like a grotesque safety. Martinez shoved a stretcher through shifting rubble. Morrison supported the hostage's weight with fierce gentleness. They reached the extraction point and didn't stop. They ran to the drop zone where the helicopter would hover for a heartbeat and be gone. The desert sky opened like a mouth, and the rotors caught them, chaotic, loud, alive. They slid into the craft, breath ragged, lungs burning. Behind them, the mountain breathed its last in a thunderous demolition that sent a wave of heat across their backs. On the flight out, Dr. Walsh sat wrapped in a blanket, fingers trembling. She looked at Sarah and said haltingly, "You trained them like you said." Sarah's reply was quiet, "You're safe now." But safety was a temporary shelter. The victory would be catalogued and analyzed, the costs counted in sleepless nights and inmen's stilled laughter. In the dark hum of the helicopter, Sarah let herself feel the weight she'd carried since the morning, relief braided with grief for what could have been lost. They had been unpredictable. They had been ruthless when needed and gentle when possible. They had been, for a few hours, more than a unit, something human and whole. When the aircraft banked toward home, she closed her eyes and for the first time in days allowed a small, honest thought to surface. They had earned more than respect. They had earned trust, frail, raw, and very real. Outside, the mountain smoked like a wound. Inside, 12 men breathed in the same rhythm. Leadership had been 1,000 small decisions. Tonight, it had kept them alive. The sound of rotors faded into the night until it became memory. Then there was only the sea. Flat, endless, silent. They landed on the carrier deck just before dawn, 12 soldiers and one rescued hostage, stepping into the cold gray of morning light that didn't feel like victory. No one spoke. Not from exhaustion, but because there were no words that fit what they'd just crawled out of. Sarah's boots hit the deck last. She watched the team walk ahead, shoulders slumped, eyes hollowed by adrenaline's retreat. They looked like survivors, not heroes. Good, she thought, heroes die, survivors adapt. She turned her gaze toward the horizon. A thin line of gold trembled over the water, catching in the waves like fire struggling to live. Somewhere beneath it, the ocean swallowed the ruins of the mountain, and the men who'd chosen to stay behind inside it. The Shadow Network's facility was gone, but not the people behind it. The kind of darkness they'd faced never died. It moved, reassembled, learned. And so would they. Medical crews swarmed the deck. Dr. Walsh was taken away first, her face pale, body trembling, but eyes alert. She clutched Sarah's hand before they separated. "They'll come after me," she whispered. Sarah squeezed back. "Not while I'm breathing." Those 6 words, simple, quiet, absolute, were the closest thing Sarah ever said to a promise. Hours later, in the debriefing room, they sat under harsh fluorescent light that stripped away whatever dignity exhaustion had left them. William's face was bruised. Martinez's arm was bandaged. Chen had a cut across his forehead that refused to stop bleeding. They looked rough, human, the way real soldiers do when the cameras aren't around. The commanding admiral stood at the front, a tall, gray figure with a voice that carried authority like a storm carries thunder. "I've read the report," he said. "You recovered the hostage, eliminated enemy infrastructure, no fatalities. I should be congratulating you." But his tone didn't sound congratulatory. Sarah stood at attention, jaw tight. "Sir, permission to speak freely." "Granted." "With respect," she said, "the mission wasn't clean. There were secondary detonations we didn't predict. If they were set to wipe evidence, they did their job. We don't have enough data to confirm who ran the operations core." The Admiral's eyes met hers. "You think the shadow network has deeper roots?" "I don't think, sir," she said quietly. "I know." He nodded once slowly. "We'll handle intelligence follow-up. For now, your team's on standby. Medical, then 36-hour rest." Rodriguez, seated beside her, muttered, "Rest, right." The Admiral heard it but ignored it. He dismissed them with a crisp, "Good work, Commander Chen." Good work. 2 words that never sat right with her. Not when she could still feel the heat of the mountain, the way the air had shuddered when it exploded behind them. She didn't want good work, she wanted understanding. But that wasn't something command ever gave. Back in her quarters, the silence pressed in like a second skin. She removed her gear slowly, gloves, sidearm, headset, vest, setting each piece on the table with care. The motions were ritual, deliberate. When she reached the last piece, the name tag she'd kept hidden during her days as recruit, she held it in her hand for a long time. LTSCHEN. A simple patch of cloth that had cost her everything. She set it down gently. In the mirror, she saw the reflection of someone who no longer fit inside that name. A knock came at the door. It was Williams. He stood there, holding a mug of coffee that looked more like engine oil. "Figured you wouldn't sleep." She smirked faintly. "You figured right." He entered, closing the door behind him. The air between them felt different now, not rank and subordinate, but something quieter, familiar. He handed her the mug. "Hell of a run." "Yeah," she said, staring into the coffee. "Hell of a run." He hesitated, then said, "You know, I used to think leadership was about shouting loud enough that people couldn't question you." "And now?" she asked. "Now I think it's about keeping steady when everyone else falls apart." Sarah smiled, tired, genuine. "You figured that out fast." He chuckled, then turned serious. "The men trust you, all of them, even Rodriguez." "That's a miracle." He nodded, "but they're also wondering what's next, because they know it's not over. You can feel it." Sarah leaned against the wall, the fatigue visible in every movement. "It's not over," she said. "That facility was one head of the snake. The rest are still moving." William studied her quietly. "You think command will send us again?" She looked down at her hands, scarred, trembling just slightly. "I think command will wait until it's too late." He didn't argue. He didn't need to. Before leaving, he said one more thing, softer, almost hesitant. "Whatever happens next, Commander, you brought us home. That's what matters." After he left, she whispered into the empty room, "For now." The next day, as the carrier cut across the ocean, Sarah joined the team on deck. They were sitting in a loose circle, talking, joking, the way men do when they're trying to disguise the aftershocks of fear. She watched them for a moment, unannounced. Martinez was laughing about Morrison's misstep during extraction. "You tripped over a crate, man. You nearly took out the hostage. Morrison fired back. I saved her, you're welcome. Rodriguez noticed her first. Commander. The laughter quieted, but only for a second before Williams said, at ease. She's not here to inspect. Sarah smiled faintly. Actually, I am. They froze. Then she added, inspection of morale. Laughter returned, lighter this time. She joined them, sitting cross-legged on the cold deck, the smell of salt in the air. Martinez, she said, how's the arm? Still attached, ma'am, can't complain. Good, because next time I'll need both of them working. He grinned, next time, huh? Sarah met his gaze. Don't kid yourself, there's always a next time. That sobered them all a little. After a while, Morrison asked the question everyone else was avoiding. Commander, what if next time we don't come back? Sarah looked out over the ocean. The wind tugged at her hair, the waves crashing below like restless ghosts. Then we do what we always do, she said softly. We make it count. No speech, no promise, just truth. Later that evening, Sarah met with Dr. Walsh in the infirmary. The doctor looked fragile but alert, wrapped in a thermal blanket, eyes haunted but steady. You saved me, she said quietly as Sarah entered. They would have killed me within the week. Sarah shook her head. We all saved you. Dr. Walsh's expression darkened. You don't understand. What they were building down there, it wasn't just data. It was strategy, behavioral maps. They've been tracking special forces patterns globally. Sarah's stomach tightened. You're saying they're predicting our moves. Worse, Walsh said. They're learning how to create them, to provoke responses, manipulate operations from the inside out. Sarah frowned. You think there's infiltration? Dr. Walsh nodded slowly. Not think. No, they had intel that could only have come from someone high in the chain. The words hit Sarah harder than gunfire. She felt the world tilt, realization forming like ice behind her ribs. If what Walsh said was true, then their mission wasn't just a battle. It was bait. She left the infirmary in silence, walking the dim corridor alone. Every sound was amplified, her footsteps, the hum of the ship, the creak of steel under wind. Somewhere in the depths of the carrier, men were laughing again, pretending everything was fine. But inside her, a new tension coiled. She went to the observation deck, leaning against the railing, eyes on the horizon. The ocean looked calm, but she knew better. Calm seas hid deep currents. Someone had known their target, someone had wanted them there. And now that someone was still out there watching. Her comm buzzed softly. A message blinked on her secure tablet. Good work, Commander Chen. Debrief incomplete. Await further orders. Nothing unusual except the signature code. It wasn't from command. It was from a frequency she hadn't seen since before selection. Her pulse steadied, not from calm but from instinct. The past had found her. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then shut it off. Behind her, the waves whispered against the hull, low, relentless, eternal. She spoke to them like an old friend. So it begins again. And somewhere in that quiet, she found both fear and resolve braided together, the same way they always were. Because for soldiers like her, peace wasn't a reward. It was just the silence between storms. Washington never feels like victory. The streets look polished, the windows mirror perfect, but underneath, the city hums with the same frequency as a war zone. Quiet lies, hidden weapons, people smiling while they reload. Sarah walked through the Pentagon's south entrance in civilian clothes, a file clutched under one arm. No one saluted her, no one even looked twice. That was the point. The mission didn't exist. Inside, the air smelled of waxed floors and cold coffee. A young lieutenant escorted her down a corridor of glass offices and closed doors. Commander Chen, he said softly, Admiral Morrison is expecting you. The name still hit a nerve. He'd been the one who'd signed her orders, the man who believed a woman could lead SEALs before anyone else dared say it aloud. She nodded once, "Thank you." The Admiral's office was bathed in pale light from the Potomac. He stood behind his desk, older than she remembered, the edges of his uniform creased by responsibility. "Sarah," he said, using her first name the way only old mentors can, "you brought them home." "I brought most of them back," she corrected, "all alive physically." He studied her face. "You expected medals." She almost laughed. "I expected silence, but I didn't expect it to feel this loud." He motioned for her to sit. "Washington doesn't decorate ghosts. The report is sealed. You and your team will be reassigned quietly. It's the cleanest outcome we could hope for." And the shadow network. Fragmented, disorganized. What's left will crawl underground and wait. We'll keep eyes on them. She looked down at the folder in her hands. 12 names, 12 signatures. "And my men. They'll get new orders within the month." "Together." The Admiral hesitated. "Unlikely. Different commands, different cover assignments. It's safer that way." Sarah's jaw tightened. "You're scattering them." He sighed. "I'm protecting them. You did your part, Commander. Let the system handle the rest." She met his eyes. "Sir, with respect, the system didn't go down there. They did." He didn't answer, and in that silence she heard the closing of another door. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. She walked until the Pentagon was a shadow behind her. The wind off the river carried the faint smell of jet fuel and spring rain. For the first time in weeks, she was alone without noise, and it terrified her. Combat teaches you to survive chaos. No one teaches you how to survive peace. She found a bench near the reflecting pool and sat. The water rippled, dark and calm. Her reflection stared back, same face, different weight. She thought of Rodriguez's grin under the helicopter's red light, of Williams's steady voice, of Martinez humming softly to calm his nerves. Men who'd learned to trust her, not because of her gender, not even because of her rank, but because she never asked them to believe in her, only to believe in the mission. Now those bonds would dissolve in bureaucracy and new orders. She leaned forward, elbows on knees. For a moment she wished she'd fought harder against the classification, against the silence, but part of her understood the logic. Some wars had to stay invisible to prevent bigger ones. Still, a quiet part of her whispered, "If no one remembers, what was it for?" That night her apartment felt too clean. The city hummed outside, traffic, laughter, distant sirens. But inside it was just her, a duffel bag, and the echo of a life she hadn't lived in months. She tried sleeping, but sleep was a language she'd forgotten. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw dust falling through the cave light, heard the echo of collapsing stone, felt the air thicken before each explosion. At 2 a.m. she rose, poured coffee and opened her laptop. 12 unread messages blinked in her secure inbox, one from each of her men. Short, cautious, encoded with humor only she would recognize. "Martinez still alive. You owe me a drink." "Rodriguez, they put me on stateside training. Boring as hell, miss the noise." "Williams, retiring, feels wrong, feels right. Hard to tell which." "Chen, we made history. They can hide the report, not the truth." She stared at that last line for a long time. Then she typed one reply to all of them, a message that would delete itself after reading. "Wherever they send you, remember this. Leadership isn't a title. It's a promise kept in silence. Keep it alive." She hit send, then closed the laptop. Days turned into weeks. She went through motions, meetings, briefings, the slow bureaucratic bleed of returning to normal. But normal was a language she couldn't pronounce anymore. At a ceremony she wasn't invited to attend, another unit received medals for an operation that neutralized a high-level insurgent cell. She watched the coverage on TV. recognizing in the background the blurred silhouette of the compound she'd destroyed. Her chest tightened, not jealousy, but a strange mix of relief and resentment. Relief that someone else carried the story now. Resentment that truth had been repackaged into something clean enough to put on the news. One afternoon, she visited the families of two men who'd been injured in training weeks before deployment, injuries that had kept them from joining the mission. They'd heard rumors but no confirmation. One mother asked quietly, did it matter? All the pain, all the loss, did it make any difference? Sarah paused, searching for words that didn't sound like a speech. Yes, she said finally, because sometimes the world only changes by inches, but those inches mean someone else's son doesn't die tomorrow. The woman nodded slowly, tears blurring her eyes. Sarah left without another word. Outside, rain began to fall, thin, hesitant. She stood there, letting it soak through her jacket. Weeks later, she was called to a nondescript building on the outskirts of Arlington. A single room, a single man waiting inside, civilian suit, intelligence badge. He slid a file across the table. Your team's operation created ripples. The shadow network isn't dead. It's reorganizing. We need someone who understands their structure. Sarah glanced at the file, then at him. You're asking me to go back. He nodded, different capacity, off-book, strategic liaison. And if I say no? He smiled faintly. Then you disappear into history, Commander, a footnote no one's allowed to read. She looked at the file again. Somewhere deep inside, something stirred, not pride, not excitement, but a sense of unfinished duty. Give me 24 hours, she said. He stood, of course, but you won't sleep anyway. That night, she sat on her balcony, overlooking the city. Below, headlights stitched ribbons of white across dark streets. Above, the sky was bruised with clouds. She thought about saying no, about disappearing quietly, taking a teaching post somewhere, maybe writing the book she'd promised herself she'd write someday, one that would never use names, only feelings. But she also thought about Rodriguez, Williams, Chen, and about every woman still fighting to be seen as something more than a footnote. If she walked away, who would fight the next battle for them? The answer hurt because it was simple. No one. By dawn, her decision was made. She sent one message to the contact address in the file, I'm in, but I choose my team. Then she closed the laptop and watched the horizon bleed gold over the river. A new day, the same war, just a different battlefield. Her phone buzzed, a single encrypted reply. Understood, debrief at 900. Welcome back to the shadows. Sarah exhaled slowly. The world would never know her name, never see the medals that didn't exist, never hear the story told without distortion. But the men she led would remember, the woman she rescued would remember. And maybe that was enough. She picked up her coffee mug, hands steady again for the first time in weeks. They thought I was just another recruit, she whispered. Maybe I still am, still learning, still fighting. The sun climbed higher, turning the glass towers gold. Sometimes the bravest thing, she murmured, is not fighting for glory, but for the right to keep fighting at all. The file was heavier than paper had a right to be. She held it in both hands as the elevator descended into the classified levels beneath Arlington, where the air itself felt filtered through secrecy. When the door slid open, the hallway smelled faintly of oil and ozone. A single voice greeted her, Commander Chen, right on time. It was the same intelligence officer who'd offered her the liaison post, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. He gestured toward a door marked No Access, Level 7 clearance. Your team's inside, he said. They've been briefed on need to know. Her pulse kicked. My team. He nodded. We honored your request. Sarah stepped through the door and stopped. Williams was there, leaning against a crate, arms folded. Rodriguez sat cross-legged on the floor, tossing a stress ball between hands. Martinez, Chen, Morrison, all of them. For a second no one spoke, then Williams grinned. Told you we'd follow you anywhere. The laugh that escaped her was half disbelief, half relief. Guess the Pentagon still has a heart after all. Heart, Rodriguez said, more like plausible deniability. They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that builds bridges over unspoken things. The mission this time wasn't a raid. No night insertion, no mountain fortress. It was intelligence recovery, a ghost operation inside a city where politics and shadows shared the same address. The shadow network wasn't dead. It had fractured, embedding itself inside shell corporations and humanitarian fronts. Their new objective: retrieve data proving the network's reach before it could disappear again. No uniforms, no patches, just anonymity and nerve. Sarah studied the maps projected across the table, office towers, alleys, safe houses disguised as charities. This isn't a war zone, she said. It's a chessboard, but don't let the clean suits fool you, the pieces still bleed. Williams nodded. So what's the play? Precision, she replied. No noise, no trail, no heroics. In and out before they know they were compromised. Rodriguez smirked. Same old Chen. Different field, she said. Same rules. 2 nights later, they touched down in the foreign capital. Rain-slick streets, air thick with exhaust and music from open cafes. To anyone watching, they were business travelers and engineers, journalists and consultants. Sarah walked among them, her posture loose, her face unreadable. She learned long ago that invisibility was its own kind of armor. The operation unfolded in small, deliberate movements. A coded flash drive hidden in a briefcase, surveillance drones disguised as delivery units, quiet handoffs in crowded markets. Every detail felt rehearsed, but no rehearsal ever survived contact with the real. Midway through, Chen's voice crackled over the encrypted channel. Commander, we've got movement, 3 hostiles tailing Rodriguez. Stay calm, she said softly. Remember the alley routes. Rodriguez ducked into a side street, blending into a flow of pedestrians. One of the pursuers brushed too close. The briefcase exchanged hands, planned, seamless. Within minutes, the threat dissolved into traffic. Sarah exhaled slowly. The years had turned fear into an instrument she could tune at will, but it still hummed somewhere deep inside her. By dawn, they had the data, hard proof of offshore accounts, covert shipments, new cells forming in places the world pretended were peaceful. They met in a rented flat overlooking the city. Rain pattered against windows streaked with neon. Martinez set the recovered drive on the table, proof of life for the monsters under the bed. Sarah looked at the small piece of plastic that had cost them so much time, risk, and secrecy. Sometimes saving the world looks smaller than it feels. Williams poured coffee into paper cups. You think anyone up top will actually use this? She shrugged. Maybe, maybe not, but we did our part. Still ghosts, he said. Better ghosts than liars, she replied. That evening, as they prepared to disperse, Rodriguez lingered by the doorway. You know, Commander, there's something weird about all this. Sarah looked up. What's that? We used to fight wars in places no one could pronounce. Now we fight them in spreadsheets and hard drives. But the enemy's the same. People who think they can own the world by rewriting truth. She smiled faintly. Then we keep rewriting it back. He grinned. Guess so. When he left, the apartment felt larger, emptier. She returned to Washington a week later. The operation had been a success, though it would never be acknowledged. A classified victory inside a classified life. At headquarters, she handed off the recovered data. The same intelligence officer accepted it with a nod and no thanks. Good work, Commander. You're cleared for indefinite leave. Indefinite, she asked. He smiled politely. Think of it as rest or retirement off the record. She understood the polite language of dismissal. Mission done, liability removed. Sarah left without shaking his hand. Home again. Same apartment, same silence. But something had changed this time. She didn't unpack. Instead, she opened the small case she'd carried since the cave, the one that held nothing but dog tags, a folded map, and a single photo. The photo showed her and the team beside the helicopter, dirt on their faces, exhaustion in their eyes, faint smiles like secrets they weren't allowed to tell. She traced the edges of the picture with her thumb. There would be no medals, no monuments, but the truth lived in moments like that, in shared silence, in unrecorded bravery. Weeks later, she received a letter. No return address, no signature. Just 12 words. If the world ever forgets, we'll remind it quietly. She smiled, folded the paper, and placed it inside the same case. Some promises didn't need orders to stay alive. Months passed. She started teaching part-time at a military leadership institute, small groups, closed sessions. She never mentioned the mission. She never said the word SEAL. But the cadets listened differently when she spoke about failure, trust, and silence. Once a young woman stayed after class. "Ma'am," she asked, hesitant, "do you ever feel like you have to prove yourself twice?" Sarah paused. "Every day," she said, "but the day you stop trying is the day you start letting someone else define you." The girl nodded, eyes shining. "Thank you." Sarah watched her leave, heart tight with something like hope. That night, she returned to the river. The air was cold, the water dark and endless. She thought of everything that had happened: the mountain, the rescue, the politics, the silence. Somewhere out there, the shadow network would rise again. Somewhere, another team would be called, another commander tested. Maybe it would be someone like her. Maybe it would be her students. She closed her eyes and let the wind brush across her face. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible, just unseen in the right way, like the foundation of something still standing because she'd carried the weight before it. A voice broke the quiet. "Commander." She turned. William stood there, older, smiling faintly. His hands were in his jacket pockets. "You still think too much. You still sneak up on people," she said. He stepped beside her, looking out at the water. "Heard about the teaching gig. Proud of you." She laughed softly. "Never thought I'd be the one giving lectures. Someone gotta teach the next generation how to walk through hell and come out human." They stood in silence for a while, watching the city lights shimmer. Finally, William said, "You ever miss it?" Sarah considered. "Every day, but not for the reasons you think." He nodded. "The people. Always the people." When he left, she stayed until the river turned black under the moon. Then she whispered into the night, not to anyone but to everything. "They thought I was just another recruit." A pause. "Maybe that's what I'll always be. Someone still learning, still proving, still believing." She smiled, soft, tired, unbreakable. Because sometimes leadership isn't about being followed. It's about walking first, so others know it can be done. The wind carried her words away, scattering them over the water. And somewhere in a world still full of quiet wars, someone listened without knowing why, and felt braver for it.